I'm Jill with the Mobile Public Library, and I'm back again with another knitting video. In this one, I'm going to go over how patterns work. Patterns are just ways that you can get instructions to do more complicated things than simple squares. My favorite things to knit are little stuffed animals, but anything you knit, patterns work basically the same. So if you're knitting a hat, a sweater, gloves, if you've got a pattern for it, you would work your way through it just the same way as I'm working my way through my little knitted stuffed things patterns. I am working out of a book I picked up at the library book sale, which I will insert a picture over here so you know what book I'm working from. And my next project is a little stuffed cocktail. I have a friend who wanted one for her desk, so I am making her a stuffed cocktail. And so let's get into it, and you can see, follow along with me and see how a pattern operates. The first part of any pattern is going to be a list of materials. If the closer you match the materials, the closer your final product is going to come out to the one in the picture that goes with the pattern. You can substitute in to a certain extent, but whatever you substitute is going to make a little bit of a change to your final product. Like if you use chunkier yarn, you're going to get a chunkier product. If you use a smaller needle, it's going to be smaller needles, it's going to be a little bit smaller. So, make your materials decisions with that in mind, and match the ones in the pattern as closely as you can or as closely as you want to. The second part of any pattern is the tension or gauge. You will usually see gauge in American patterns. This book is from the UK, so in this one it has tension, and that's actually just an indication of how tightly the person pulled the yarn while they were knitting. Because depending on if you knit tight or you knit loose, you can use the same materials, same needles, and it come out two different sizes if two different people knit it. Sometimes this makes a difference to you, and then sometimes it doesn't. So if you're trying to make a sweater and you want to fit properly, you want to make sure you are knitting with the same gauge as the person who wrote the pattern. If you're doing something where the size doesn't matter, then you can just ignore the tension part because it won't make much difference to you. Just as an example of what I mean by both the materials and the tension is I made this little clown. It's out of the same book, and he is 6 inches tall. Well, I've got the pattern right here in this book. I used a medium weight yarn instead of a light worsted, which is what this pattern calls for. And since I had a little bit bigger yarn, I used a little bit bigger needles. So I used a 3.75 millimeter instead of a 3.25 millimeter needle to knit him. So that made my gauge different. Because on this one it says the gauge should be 26 stitches for 34 rows, measures 4 inches. Well, I didn't even bother to make a gauge swatch, but I know with the materials and the needles I was using, it was going to be bigger than that. So he came out 6 inches. The pattern had him as 4 inches. And since it didn't matter to me whether he was 6 inches or 4 inches, I was just like, well, this yarn will work. I will just follow the pattern. But if you're trying to fit something like a garment, a sweater dress or a sweater, you will want to get the gauge right. And I will link a video in the information box that kind of explains more in depth about gauge and how do you measure it and what do you do if you're not getting the right gauge. So once you have gathered up your materials and you've matched your gauge or decided you didn't need to match your gauge, now you get into the actual knitting part. So we'll just go down to the first instruction right there, and it'll always tell you to begin with a cast on. Let me just grab my materials here. It says cast on with A, 24 stitches. So A is white, and grab my needles. And it says to do the thumb method, which I happen to know is the same thing as a slingshot cast on, long tail cast on. Like the final product's the same, it's just a different way of doing it. But if I didn't know that, and I wanted to know, could I substitute in the long tail, then you could always Google it and watch a little video and see what the thumb one method is, and either learn it or find out the details and go, oh, okay, so that's what the thumb method's like. I can substitute the one I know in for it. So I'm going to go ahead and put on the 24 stitches. 3, 24. Okay. Now I've got 24 stitches on my needle. So now I can move to the next instruction. It says row 1, WS. WS means wrong side, meaning it's the side that's facing me. Actually, if I start knitting, the side that's facing me is going to be the inside of the project. And again, that does not, in this situation, you just do what it tells you to do, so you don't really need to worry about wrong side versus right side, but it does give you an indication sometimes if you're on the right track. Anyway, so the first instruction says row 1, purl. So I will just purl for the whole row, just the one where you put your needle in the front and pull the yarn to the back. So I'll just purl this whole row. Okay, that is one row done, and I like to keep track of my knitting projects with a little clicker. So I'll click 1, so now I know to go on to row 2. You can keep track of, you don't need one of these, you can keep track of where you are in a pattern any kind of way. Some people use tally sheets. I've seen people take a paper clip and just move it along the side of the pattern, or use a post-it note and do it down the pattern as they go. You just want to make sure you're keeping your place so you know which instruction you're up to. So I use a clicker. Okay, so clicked 1, and now I do 2. It says work 2 rows in GST for rim of glass. Now GST means garter stitch. These abbreviations, like over time, you just kind of pick up the abbreviations because they're all fairly standard and you see the same ones in patterns over and over again. But again, if I didn't know what GST is, I could just look up on Google. And a garter stitch is actually just all knit stitches. So, we've done a row of purl so far, and now we're doing 2 rows of knit. So 2 and 3 are going to be knit stitches. And you'll notice so far there's nothing in this pattern that we have not, other than vocabulary terms, there's nothing in this pattern that we did not go over in that basic knitting video. Okay, that's another row done. And it's the same again for the 3rd row. So I'm going to pause this video and come back to when we are ready for the 4th row. Okay, now I am up to row 4, and the instructions say begin with K row, work 5 rows in STST, ending with RS row. Now, again, you could totally Google each of the things you didn't understand, and it would give you a demonstrative video and a definition. Again, having seen a lot of knitting patterns before, I know it says begin with a knit row, which is what K stands for, work 5 rows, and STST means stockinette stitch. And stockinette stitch means that you're alternating knit rows and purl rows. So that means I'll do row 4 is a knit row, row 5 is a purl, row 6 is a knit, and so on. It says ending with an RS, which is a right side row. So that means when I finish row 8, when it's facing me, that should be with the outside of the cocktail glass. So I will go ahead and do another knit row for number 4. Okay, so that's another row done, and then row 5 should be purl because it's a stockinette stitch, and the last one I did was knit, so this next one's going to be purl. And I will just pause this video for a little bit because I have 4 more rows to do. Okay, I just finished row 8, And it says, where it says right side is the one I finished on. This is the row I just finished on, and it's got this pattern as opposed to this pattern because this is going to be on the outside of my cocktail glass, just FYI. Okay, now row 9 is where you first get to some shaping. Shaping is what we call it when you're adding or removing stitches from your row here so that your piece of cloth gets narrower or wider. So this here is going narrower. Row 9 reads knit 1, then open parentheses. Parentheses usually indicate something you repeat. Purl 2 together, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, close parentheses, and then you keep repeating that. It says 2 last 3 stitches. And then the last 3 stitches you purl 2 together, knit 1. And again, that's all knit and purls. The purl 2 together is basically the same as a knit. The only difference is you stick your needle through 2 stitches at one time instead of 1 stitch. So let me go ahead and follow those directions. So I'm going to knit the first one. Then it says purl 2 together. And let's see if I can. Alright, and then you stick your needle through 2 stitches, wrap the yarn around, and pull it through. So like I said, it's just like a regular purl, except you stick your needle through 2 stitches instead of 1 stitch. Okay, purl 2 together, and then it says knit 1, and then purl 1, and knit 1. And I've reached the end of my parentheses, so I'm going to go back and repeat that. So we'll purl 2 together. Okay, and I'm down to my last 3 stitches on this side, so that stops the repeat, and it says purl 2 together and then knit 1. So purl these. Purl 2 together. Okay, and then at the end of it, it says 19 stitches. That last number on the end tells you how many stitches you should come up with if you've done it correctly. So let me count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. I've got 19 stitches, so apparently I did it right. So now I am up to row 10, and row 10 says knit 1, then open parentheses, purl 1, knit 1, close parentheses. To end, this row sets the moss stitch and is repeated. The moss stitch is another stitch pattern like stockinette and garter stitches, but unlike garter stitch and stockinette, it's not so common that this pattern maker expects you to know it. Some patterns, depending on who wrote it, might not have the instructions for the moss stitch like this one does. Because the moss stitch is just alternating knit and purl stitches in one row, starting with knit, and then you want to do an odd number of stitches. If you're an even number of stitches, it'd be a rib stitch, but don't worry about that right now. We're not doing the rib. So if you came across this pattern and it was written by a different author, they might just say row 10 moss stitch. And in that case, you would have to look up the moss stitch and find what the pattern is. But because this author was good enough to give you the pattern, you don't need to look anything up. You just need to do what it says in here. So we will do knit 1, purl 1, all the way down to the end of the row. Okay, so that is row 10. And for row 11, it says change to B and work 13 rows in moss stitch. So I'm going to change colors to my green yarn, and then I'm going to do that same knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. for 13 rows. Now to change colors, all you have to do, and again, you know, if you want a close-up view of this, you can always Google and find a video with a close-up view and a good explanation and various tips. What you want to do is you want to leave enough of a tail that this will not unravel on you. So we have that cut free of the white. I'll put this white aside. And I'm going to switch to the green. Again, I'm just going to leave this way so I don't sit on it. I'm going to leave enough of a tail that this doesn't unravel either. And it says knit one to start, so I put my needle in like I'm going to knit, and I'm going to like regular knit, and then I'm going to put the green over it and knit that through. And you usually have to pull on the yarn to tighten them up for the first couple of stitches. But after you get the first couple of stitches in, it's firmly in there, and you can just keep going on like normal. And then purl one. Knit one. Purl one. And now it's in there just like normal. I'll just pull on those to tighten up that last stitch. So you can see those knit stitches are in there just like if I were continuing with the same color. I'm going to stop the video and get on with the rest of these 13 rows. Okay, I just finished the 13 rows of boss stitch in green, and now I'm up to row 24. Make sure I'm correct there. I am up to row 24, and it says change to C, which is the gray yarn. So I will snip this off again. Set the green aside. Grab gray. Okay, now 24 says rows 24 to 27 change to C and work in garter stitch, which is again the one that is all knit stitches. This one here. I'm grabbing the tail. I need to grab the working yarn. And now that I've got about 3 stitches on there, you can see it's going in there where I can work it just like normal. And that is 24, 25, 26, 27. So I can do 4 rows in garter stitch. So I will come back, I'll keep working on this and I'll come back in a minute. Okay, I just finished row 27. And this is actually a good example of what different stitch patterns look like. This is stockinette where it's flat, and then this is the moss stitch where it's kind of bumpy, and then the garter stitch gives you rows. So I finished rows number 27, and then number 28 and 29 says knit 1 row and then purl 1 row. So I'm going to knit a whole row here. And I need to purl a row. That is number 29 done, and then 30 it says knit 1, knit 2 together to end. So I'll just do what it says. Knit this first one, and then knit 2 together is just like knit purl together, except for, you know, you're knitting. So I will stick my needle through 2 stitches at one time, like so. They're so close together you can hardly see them. That is 2 stitches, and then pull the yarn through in a knit stitch, just like a normal knit stitch. And then I'll keep doing that till I reach the end of the row. That's 10 stitches, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I got the right number of stitches, and the final instruction is thread yarn through stitches on needle, pull tight and secure by threading yarn a second time through stitches. So what we're going to need to do here is, I like to give myself a lot of extra thread just in case, and also it's good to sew up these projects with the extra tail yarn. At least that's the way I like to do it. So I'm going to cut off the rest of the yarn, get that out of the way. And then I've got a yarn needle here someplace. This is just an oversized needle. You can get these in metal, but I just happen to have a little plastic one, and I actually find the plastic ones are easier to thread. So now what I'm going to do is thread onto the yarn, onto the needle. Thread through, and then I'm going to go back and pick up these stitches again from this side just to secure it better. And that's my first piece done. I will have to stitch up these edges and stuff it, and then I've got 2 more pieces to knit, and then I'll sew all of them together and it'll be a little cocktail. So as you can see, all you do to do a pattern is you get the pattern and you follow the directions. You just work it through step by step, and if you come across any steps that you don't understand or it's got unfamiliar terminology, just Google it, look up to see what those things are, because you'll find that all the different things that even if you don't recognize them to start with, once you look them up, they're just variations of knit and purl. And so if you know knit and purl, you're going to be able to do those things. So I'm going to turn this off for a minute, work on my last couple pieces and knit it together, and show you my final project. And here is my finished little cocktail. I kind of wish I'd done a, more of a light lime green color, but this is what I had, and it still came out really cute. So I'm sure my friend who wanted a little cocktail for her desk will be happy to have it. And that is pretty much how you do patterns. You just follow the instructions step by step, look up anything you don't know. If there's something else you want to see in a knitting video, let me know in the comments down below. I did have one request for supplies, so I'll probably work on that next. Leave me a comment with your favorite patterns and any questions you might have, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.